QB chasing.
G'day, listeners, and welcome back to another very special episode on the Matter Mentality podcast, where we talk all things training, nutrition, and performance to help you optimize your performance. I am joined today, or tonight for me, this morning for you, a very special guest, a colleague that we met over in the States yet again, another one that we've managed to maintain conversation and relation with. The founder of Sleep is a Skill, a degree in bachelor's degree in psychology, a behavioral change expert, very close to home for me, other things that I'm also certified in and love to talk about. I'm joined by Mollie Eastman. How are we? How are you doing? How is your morning? How's Texas?
Texas is great. I know we're just chatting about the fact I'm new to Austin, Texas, and crazy that I live here now. It's just wild to me. I would have never thought that would be the case. I'd been in New York for like over a decade and kind of a digital nomad for about 3 years in Southeast Asia, hopping back and forth. Yeah, did that. I don't know if you ever dabbled in like the Tim Ferriss back in the day. But that was kind of that, thinking. And so, to find myself in Austin, wild, but doing well and just feeling bad that you're up so late in the night to talk about sleep of all things.
Yeah. I actually messaged Cav and I was like, oh, we've managed to link up a time with Mollie to get on the podcast. Unfortunately, it was daylight savings kicked in like this week, I think, for you guys. And we're like, oh, wait, that pushes it back, I think, an hour. I'm like, she's going to be so disappointed in my sleep for this.
Well, it's a great time to discuss sleep when hopefully you're yearning for it now. So we'll get you some sleep shortly.
Hey, I can talk underwater with concrete in my mouth, so we're good. It's I'll get some sleep afterwards. But look, we're gonna have a very as we sort of talk about off camera or off recording, a not so structured conversation where I see a lot of my team, a lot of my clients, a lot of my athletes, and just a lot of the listeners that I think I interact with understand my drive for performance, my drive for high performance, my drive for just consistent effort and just, chasing after the things you want. But they also know my push towards better sleep. The adage that I can't stand is, the old, I'll sleep when I'm dead, outwork your enemies, work while they're sleeping, all that sort of the crap that used to be like the old hustlers, entrepreneurs mantra from the 50s and 60s and Mad Men era and that sort of crap. And the big push for me is always to try and flip that for my guys or my girls, because I know how much sleep plays a role in performance. So we're going to have a lot of, a very good conversation heading down that rabbit hole. But firstly, I'd like to get a background on you, because we've got a lot of things here that, we can dive into. Just mutually being nerds of psychology and behavior change, I think would be, even already fun and exciting. But a bit of a background on you and kind of how you got to sleep. Like, where did it start for you where you're like, this is the stuff I want to talk about?
Absolutely. So first off, I love your, what sounds like a clear commitment for sleep and for yourself and for others. And I love that you particularly pointed on the "I'll sleep when I'm dead" adage, because my story is one of doing everything not to do for your sleep in my formative years, including having really just, maladaptive narratives and labels around my sleep. So it would look like saying things like, oh, I'm a night owl, I'm a short sleeper, it's in my genes. And then of course the good old, I'll sleep when I'm dead. And I really think of my life now in a 3-part series of the beginning years of my life. And this was as a kid, teenage years, college, and a bit thereafter, where I moved into a serial entrepreneur in Manhattan, burning the candle at both ends, lots of stress. And all of those habits even got more and more pronounced every year that would go by. And so over time, I would be going to bed later and later and being justified and righteous about it. Cause then I would say, well, I make my own hours. What's the big deal? Not a problem. Not correlating when I would get ulcer. I had the beginnings of an ulcer. I had shingles in my 20s. I had mounting anxiety and just, a lot of what felt like emotional instability and just a number of things that were not working and not correlating some of the things that I was, how I was managing my life. And it was not until I went through this rock bottom period when I had my first real experience with insomnia in a way that really shook me. It was a really acute experience. This was actually on the beginnings of starting to test out this travel life. And this was an unsuccessful test. I had gotten a, one-way ticket with my husband. We've been together now almost like 13 years or so. And in the beginning of all this, we had decided to take our our businesses on the road, even though there was like way before it was time to do that. And the amount of stress that emerged while we're, traveling throughout all this, then I experienced sleep anxiety, which is this kind of terminology of when you start to just get so fixated on your sleep, and you're not performing. It's because, you can almost have like a performance anxiety after a while. Because now each night I would be going to bed and suddenly, as opposed to how it had always been when sleep would come, sleep would not be coming in the same way. And so I started getting more and more nervous and stressed about it. And then this lasted and stretched for a period of time, long enough when I went to the doctors, left with sleeping pills. And in that moment was like, all right, I gotta figure this out. Which, by the way, you're not supposed to go to the doctors and leave with sleeping pills. They are supposed to recommend CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy, for insomnia. It is supposed to be the first approach that we're meant to administer. But, sadly, we still see a lot of pills and potions and elixirs and all that going out. So that started this quest for me to really understand, how can I restore this sleep, not just out of curiosity, but because of like panic, because I started to get fearful that I'm stuck this way or something. And coming from a family of a lot of individuals that have some mental health issues, that have dealt with a lot of prescription medications and addiction in that way, or not even addiction, but just using as prescribed, but sadly, having this downhill effect. It was really a scary time for me. So in the process, I spent a lot of time, energy, effort, money, all the things. Some things, a lot of things didn't work. And then eventually things worked. I get my sleep back to not only where it had been, but then get to experience optimizing sleep, which I didn't think was possible for me. So with that, on the other side now, we have created sleep as a skill and, online courses and newsletters. And, we work particularly with high stakes poker players and quite a niche there, work in, luxury hotels, all these things. But I say all that because it's just shocking to me that while in those moments of what can feel like desperation when our sleep is not working, what can be available is really course correcting a lack of workability in our lives, because I firmly believe that our sleep is a barometer of the workability of our life. And so often when it's not working, something in our life is not working. And so it's an opportunity to get curious. So from that place, no matter where the listener might be at, if they're, they're sleeping fine, but they'd like to improve maybe their stats on their whatever Garmin Whoop, thing, or if they're like really, really struggling, no matter where you're at, that you can up level this and really take this on as a skill set is my commitment.
That's like, I mean, there's so many things there that I agree with or empathize with and understand with. So it's definitely like it's become a mission for you to kind of correct sleep.
Totally. Because, I think also having seen some of the paths that some of my family members, very close family members, have gone down, that actually originated with sleep. That was partly where the fear was for me, because then when that happened to me, it was like, oh no, is this the moment where like I'm gonna lose my mind? Because the mental health and sleep are so so intimately connected. And I was feeling so anxious, so not myself. and seeing some of that path that people can find themselves on and not have real advocates or really that education, and sadly just are opting for the pill. And we know that from sleep perspective, I mean, show me really a solid sleeping pill that is going to make a difference, from a prescription medication element that's going to really move the needle for your sleep. It's just doesn't really exist. And actually most of the time can be really deleterious to your health. Supplements are kind of another topic, but certainly, when we're looking to find that external kind of thing that can save us in that moment. And I get it. I wanted that thing too. But it turns out that often it's this education, it's learning the skill set of this thing that we do a third of our lives, 26 years on average are spent asleep. And so many of us don't think much about it. I know I didn't.
Yeah. It's so much like, all those, the classes I find in school where they're just like, we're going to do home ec, we're going to do this class, we're going to do outdoor rec, we're going to do I'm not sure exactly the class, you guys do over there, but there's all these, just these non-beneficial classes, but yet in the subjects that would make the most sense, like, learning taxes, learning how to pay off debts, learning how to do XYZ with finances, learning how to eat nutritionally, learning how to train or exercise, learning how to sleep, like these things that you would think would be in the best interest of society to learn and understand and comprehend, not for just athletes, not for just performers, not for bodybuilders, not for, NFL players, but just the average person. The detriment that we put our health through and our lifespan through by just not sleeping properly because we just don't know any better. It's like, I'll just sleep when I close my eyes. But it's like, that could be taught so much better. You could be so much more aware of the impact that sleep plays in the host of things that sleep does as a I guess an objective measure of health, the role that it plays in those aspects. It's upsetting and frustrating that it's not taught better, that it's not educated at an earlier point.
Absolutely. And I think from a systemic problem, at least here in the States, one of the things that we see is even because, we can get so frustrated, or I certainly was getting so frustrated where I'd go to the doctors, make the appointments, go to speak to these people, and would be left with really not many solutions at all and maybe a prescription. And yet from the systemic piece, sadly, most of our main, kind of gatekeeper doctors, so our primary care, and that's, how we speak about it in America, that person is getting on average 2 hours of training in sleep period. And that's even out of some of the top most prestigious schools like Harvard, in our world. So what we're seeing from this is so one, a lot of things are getting missed because we know that there are over 100 sleep-wake disorders that are present that are often being undiagnosed. And we would hope that those gatekeepers, like your primary care, could spot some of the signs of certain things, and then be able to put you on the path to support. But sadly, they don't even have that knowledge. And the thing that I'm finding, sadly, as well, there's a lot of sadness as it relates to sleep at the moment, is that there's so few sleep professionals, that in the States, it's around 7,000 sleep professionals for millions of people, and everyone sleeps. And so it's kind of a disparity. And yet one of the things that I unfortunately found, this is not across the board at all, but I will say there's a propensity to around 2 solutions for sleep that are in the modern conversations. And it's one, have a sleep study to see if you have basically sleep apnea for the most part, so we can sell you a CPAP. And not to say that that's not helpful when that is needed, but that's one path. And then the other is CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. But if it doesn't work for you, or if you can't afford, to get some of that training or what have you, kind of good luck. And then maybe we'll move on to sleeping pills. And that's what I often see. And there are so many more things that are in recent years coming out. I speak a lot about circadian rhythm entrainment. And I think just a lot of people sadly don't understand the power of that or what that even looks like. So that's part of the problem, is a missing of this skill set.
Yeah. Completely agree. Having a circadian cycle and a system in place, like to at least even be aware. Actually, not even to be aware, to even know what a circadian rhythm is, to know
Yeah.
to know where melatonin shifts and cortisol rises, to know when cortisol drops off and melatonin rises, to know how that operates, to know the different phases and cycles of your sleep. Like, you've got a Garmin or a Whoop band. Like, what do you think those peaks and troughs mean? What do you think those cycles and stages mean? What are they doing? Why are we like, why does that matter? Because once you like,
Yeah.
it's one of my favorite quotes from Nietzsche is, he who has a why can bear almost any how. But I like to add a little bit, and in that, he who understands the how can achieve anything. When you empower someone to understand how something is done, not just why they're doing it, then we've created someone that can actually get shit done. We don't teach people the how and the why of sleep. So when you understand the why, the how becomes a lot more easy to understand. When you understand the how, you can then do it. But for some reason, we have this gap between the people that know, which is why people like you exist, and the way we push it in our system with coaching. Like, it's a paramount role in how we coach people. The gap between that and just what the average person knows, because the average person doesn't really have access to me until, I reach a larger audience. Even yourself, like you said, there's 7,000 sleep professionals to 360 million people. There's such a disparity and gap between who knows sleep and people not even thinking it's a skill to work to understand. Like, it's like, oh, I just do it. Like, it's an ingrained thing. I'll just sleep when I get tired, or I fall asleep on the couch after drinking 3 beers and having a pie.
Yeah.
Like, what?
What's the
No.
problem?
Yeah, there's so much more to this for what it can give you. And like, then we start to see the cascading effects, right? Like you start to just see the impacts it has on someone where sleep is spiraling or sleep is low. Sleep in general is just off. Then they start to see an increase in appetite. They start to increase in cravings. Food satiety goes down. Mood shifts are horrible. Anxiety, as you said, sort of rises. Heart rate, blood pressure goes up. All these things start to occur. Libido drops off. So therefore, sexual intimacy in the partnership goes away. Everything just stops being not optimal. It just stops being positive in the absence of sleep. And so much of it can just be fixed by having a better understanding of why you go to bed and what the time span of bed is supposed to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to your point of around this oversimplicity, the simplifying of this thing that we do, I hear also kind of a throwback that a lot of people will say of things like, well, oh, that's nice. You work with sleep. Well, I am an amazing sleeper. I can fall asleep anytime, anywhere. The minute my head hits the pillow, I'm out, which is yet another red flag for us that something could be very wrong with your sleep, because we shouldn't actually be behaving like that. And healthy sleep looks like having it takes a little bit of time to down regulate from an awake state where you're conscious of your surroundings into a totally altered state that is being asleep. So we like to see on average, usually around like 10, 15 minutes or so to fall asleep. And if you're falling asleep immediately, that can be a sign that you might have something like a sleep apnea or respiratory based issues like upper airway resistance syndrome or other things that are undiagnosed, and or just really sleep deprived. And then there's some things that we can do to help support that as well. So point being, that sometimes there can be a lot of blind spots that people even have a problem and they think they're doing great. And yet it's what I really stand for is to kind of think of sleep in the future. It's not thought of like this right now, but to have it as a vital sign, the same way that we test and look for, blood pressure markers and some of these other things. The fact that we aren't tapping into some of the data that we now can have access to, I'm very data driven with sleep where appropriate. And so all the people that we do work with they're all required to wear an Oura ring, at least OURA, Oura, as a sleep tracker. And yet many of them also are wearing other sleep trackers. But the reason we do that is that we can glean a lot of information and also spot a lot of red flags that we might need to get some of these sleep tests. Cause I hope that I made it clear. It's not that sleep tests are not a worthy path. That's super important. It's just that there are far more, tools in our toolkit than we might be aware of.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree there. The necessity of, well, just like, it's like anything, it's never a one shot fits all. It's never to say like, medications don't work or the pathology doesn't work and things like that. It's just like there's ways first, there's steps first that we should probably implement before we go, let's just go straight to a test and get you on a drug. That to me is always like not the approach we take, right? But I'll take a step back because I identify something in the start of where you kind of really fell into your, I guess, love for sleep is, and you'll appreciate this from a psychological perspective, is kind of your social narrative that you presented, I think is a very common trait in a lot of people. And this goes, I find this with my clients, I find this in people on social media, I find this just in general society. We tend to identify a lot with the thing we think is either trending or taboo or a crux or an identity narrative that we can create. And we tend to identify with it and latch on. And that being like, I'm the hustler, I'm an early riser or I'm a night owl or whatever it is, the terminology we start to identify. And we know in psychological research, in counseling and therapy, identity and social narrative plays a huge role in the way you perceive yourself, the way you engage in the world, the way you behave. Do you think that is something that has gotten, I guess, far spread with the hustler mindset wannabes, I guess, on social media? They're all about the grind and that, that hard work mantra where everyone's doing, I'll get 4 hours of sleep a night. And there was all those, back in the day, like the early YouTubes and the early Instagram, there's always those motivational videos about like your enemies are awake and you're sleeping. They're going to be better than you. That to me seems like it's playing a lot into people these days. But was that something that impacted you? That hustle of like New York, was that kind of in the identity with you?
Totally, 100%. And I think that's part of why it's so important that, people like yourself with certain platforms, and as we have more of this narrative change, because the social component and the cultural component becomes so important for how we're all operating. I think we're in an interesting time where we're starting to see a bit more of a sleep renaissance, if you will. And I will also say that I think some of that may be happening in some of like the bubbles that we might be likely to be a part of, kind of this coaching, health focused world.
Bit of a bias there.
So it could have a little bit of bias for sure. But we do know that there are more articles being written about sleep. There's more studies being published about sleep. We know there's more of a problem than there had been. So we're seeing an ongoing kind of sleep epidemic as far as, so the pain point is increasing. And so often to get real change, sadly, for many of us and myself included, it had to be really, really bad for me to make some changes. So I think there could be, I think it's a worthy theory that there's enough pain here for so many people, because so many people are tired and now experiencing all the deleterious effects. Because some, things to be aware of with sleep is that we struggle to find a single domain of life that is not negatively impacted when our sleep isn't working as well as we like it to. So we might think of some of the obvious, elements. Oh, we feel fatigued the next day or what have you. But then it's so much more than that. So it extends to, of course, the mental health piece, which we spoke about, cognitive performance. It extends to our interpersonal relationships, how we're engaging with others. So when I work with poker players, they often have to be almost like chess players and be at this high aptitude rate for sometimes 12 hours or what have you at a time at the table. And if they can't emotionally regulate when they've just had a really big loss or something, then that can be really problematic to their livelihood. And so emotional regulation can be a big piece of it, but then it can expand to so many areas: cardiovascular health, for our hormonal health. And certainly this can be a big motivator I've seen often for men, just understanding just how heavily testosterone is hit when we are not sleeping. We had a expert from the U.S. Army on the podcast recently, and that's one of her approaches from, and she's active duty, rock star, and speaks to part of, as she calls, the bro science of how to get the narrative change from a group that had so historically from, in that group in the Army, there was so much of what you just said, that narrative of sleep when you're dead. Come on, pull yourself by your bootstraps. It's just a whole other thing. And so to push to the testosterone piece and understanding that what they call a point of no return, where eventually if you do, your testosterone does not return to some of its previous levels until you get that sleep. And eventually, if you keep behaving in that way, and not to like villainize, because so many of us do this, or just their circumstances or what have you. But the truth is, until we get our sleep back to where it's optimal levels, then eventually we hit this point of no return, as they're calling it, so that you just can't get your testosterone back to certain levels that it was at previously, as a result. So, there's so many things that get impacted. So it's important to, as you pointed to, know that why, but also hopefully it becomes easier when society is pulling for this as well. So that what I think where we can bring some practicality here is, I am a big push for tracking in some way, shape, or form, and hopefully bringing the social component into that. So, I love how Aura has their circles, groups, so that you can see what everyone's, how you're all sleeping and performing and what have you. Whoop has their groups too that you can join. And so there's different ways to make this a transparent thing. And I think we'll see a lot more of that, although it is controversial, like to the point that it's even on Slack groups. If you've seen that, now you can thread through your sleep results. Yeah, that was a bit of a controversial piece that now we could all see each other's sleep and how we slept the night before and blah, blah, blah. So I think we'll be entering into interesting times where this will be
social
more
media of sleep.
social media of sleep. Exactly. Yes. Which there's certainly instances where maybe you want your Uber driver. What do you guys call it? Not Uber. You call it something else there.
No, we got Uber.
Grab. No, do you call it Uber? Okay.
Yeah, Uber, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you want to know, it might be interesting or worth noting. Did your Uber driver only get 3 hours of sleep last night? That might actually be something that we see in insurance companies, that might thread through. So there's a lot of future, available where some of this transparency and getting this into the narrative, the social construct could be important.
That's unreal. That's actually, that's I can see the fence debate on that, but at the same time,
Yes.
the trust and the knowledge and, how much of our stuff should be shared and tracked. But at the same time, if it leads to, we look at the downstream effects. If an insurance company, especially the way you guys do insurance, is going to offset your premium because you're sleeping better, well, then every bastard might start sleeping better. It's funny it's funny the incentive that we require to get to the point of change, as you're sort of saying, when we look at the trans theoretical model, how much someone has to go through to get from contemplation to action, like that jump point where it's like, what is the kicker? What's that catalyst moment for you that's going to make you go from, I'm thinking about this, to actually I should do this? And unfortunately for a lot of people, it is something, it's either financial, it's traumatic, it's emotional, but it's usually something quite significant for them to go, oh shit, I need to actually figure this out.
Yeah, absolutely. It has to get painful. And I think, potentially for your listeners, I know you pointed to kind of the performance piece, and even just from a physical performance piece, it's just so I would make the argument, and even just to try on, say if you try it on for like a couple weeks, that we begin with the foundation of sleep with the lens, and see how our performance can improve even on the physical aspect of things. Just even that muscle recovery and growth component that takes place, where you're understanding largely, or a big portion of it on the first half of your night. So every time we keep staying up to watch whatever Netflix something, then it's lobbing off that first half of your night, and it doesn't work like an equalizing element. It instead seems to keep us on time, so that we're cutting off some of that deep sleep, so that muscle recovery and growth, elements of immune function. So there's the likelihood of getting sick, injury risk. So, how annoying that can be if you're just getting on track with your training and what have you, and then you get injured. All of those things, and not to mention your coordination and reaction time and just energy and endurance, all of those factors we clearly see are impacted by that source point of prioritization and curiosity around how to improve your sleep results. And I guess then this is where my husband also says I need a show that's like Mollie Ruins Everything, because the sad thing is, as far as how do we improve our sleep, one of the components actually is very unsexy, and it's but it is important to call out, which is consistency. And it's like
Mhm.
the most boring thing in the
Yep.
world. But for sleep, one of the places that we often have people begin is their wake up time, and that they are selecting mindfully as much as possible. And I know
Mhm.
there's a lot of considerations and stuff, but where you can, choosing that 7 day a week wake up time, plus or minus around 30 minutes or so,
Yep.
swinging it, but that you're really anchored at a pretty consistent point. Um, and then with that consistency, so if you get nothing else out of what I'm saying, you're starting with that 7 day a week wake up time, and then you're marrying with it this bright light exposure that we're starting to see more people speak to. But that ideally it's happening outside. I mean,
Yes.
I've got all these windows behind me if you're seeing any of the video recording, but all these windows behind me are not sufficient for resetting my master clock for the circadian rhythm piece. Because in case you weren't aware, our circadian rhythm exists on the spectrum. It's this 24-hour cycle that can really be functioning, like this Swiss, clock, or it can be really, really not working and kind of all over the place. And sadly, that's where a lot of people are at right now, just given our society. So how do we fine tune that clock? Well, it begins on the resetting of it every single morning. And
Mhm.
it does require us to physically get outside and get that light in our eyes, because then that will connect with our suprachiasmatic nucleus, that master clock that then communicates with all these peripheral clocks in virtually every cell and organ in our body. So trillions of clocks. I feel like I want to make like a kid's book or something with just like imagery of just all these clocks everywhere to know that we need to
Yes.
mind our clocks, right? And so how do we do that? Well, it starts in the morning, actually. So it's the beginning to great sleep is in the morning with that consistency, because you can't always mandate what time you're going to fall asleep. You can set yourself
Mhm.
up powerfully. You could do a lot of things to support it, but good
Mhm.
luck forcing sleep. I tried that. That doesn't work. So so instead, we can always begin with the control on when we wake up. So that's where we start there. But then
Mhm.
the pairing of that bright light exposure, the most important Zeitgeber or time giver for sleep is our light dark cycles.
Yes.
So for everyone, what we want to support is bright days and dark nights. So those
Yes.
are the two most important things for really handling a lot of this. A lot of this gets figured out when we just do this, but most people are like, well, that's not really a great tip. Like what? So just turn on the lights. It's not that simple. It turns out that there's seasonal differences depending on your skin tone. There might be different lengths of time that you might need to be outside for the vitamin
Mhm.
D component. So vitamin D is this part of the recipe for getting serotonin. Serotonin being a precursor to melatonin. So that's an important piece of the puzzle to actually set you up for that strong melatonin pulse in the evening. So we
Mhm.
need to be outside for certain stretches, but for some people it might be longer or shorter, and depending on where you live. So that's, you got to get curious about that. And then you also need to know that separately, the bright light exposure into the eyes at different parts throughout the day, including morning when it's more infrared rich, going into, solar noon when it's right above you, then to your evening sunset when there's more infrared again, that all those things tell the body things about sampling the environment all the time to try to understand what time it is and what to be doing when, what organs should be on and off, if you will. And so all of this is really, really important. And I think it also helps provide this really cool blueprint for us of knowing that even things like our thoughts have a clock component. So we actually see that our thoughts kind of change in the coloring of them as we get later and later. There's something called the Mind After Midnight study that
Mhm.
found that in your wee hours of the night, some of your thought patterns get flawed. And sadly, we see suicidality rates go up,
Yes.
depression, anxiety, and whatever your wee hours are, 2, 3 in the morning for you. For not just for you, for any of us, that wee hour, the morning time frame, you want to even realize that all those clocks are affecting every single component of your experience of life, including even how you're thinking. So this is where I hope the curiosity comes in. But if you even just do nothing more than getting yourself physically outside as much as you possibly can throughout the course of the day to get that super bright light,
Mhm.
and then do your due diligence so that you don't have a single blue light on that has blue light present in it. Just any normal light bulb. We don't want those on at night. We want you to be using things like red light, Himalayan salt lamps, candles, fire, etc. I know that can sound like so weird, but it's really only been 144 years since Edison invented the light bulb. And so we act like this is just like normal to have this 24-hour lifestyle, and it's really not.
It's like of everything you just said, it's interesting how like I wrote an ebook when I first really started putting out content for Matter on stress as a system, because I was like, I was so frustrated at how poorly people perceive stress as a sympathetic and parasympathetic system, but also as a positive, sorry, not just a negative, but as a positive. Stress, obviously, an inducer of change and adaptation. And it's mind-blowing to me how much people don't actually comprehend that a lot of modern living is only like of recent years. Like you said, the invention of the light bulb, 144 years. You know, the evolutionary systems we have of the way we deal with stress, the way we perceive threats, the way we respond with anxiety. All these things are systems that were built into us from 100,000 years ago and have evolved with us across time. And it's only just recently, when we look at the grand scheme of the time frame, that we've adjusted that significantly. We went from having lights out, you've got a candle light that might only burn so bright, you know, that you'll turn on at maybe 5 p.m., but you don't actually know it's 5 p.m. You just turn it on because it's starting to get dark. And then all of a sudden, hey, guess what? We've got electricity, and now we've got a light bulb in every single house. 50 years later, we can all turn a light on and live 24 hours a day. Like, it's so nuanced and new, and everyone's just like, oh, that's just the way it is now. I can operate 24/7. You can, but should you?
Right. Oh, exactly. Totally. Like I'll get some comments on social media and stuff of, I'll talk about the light piece, and then sometimes people will be like, well, I mean, light bulbs were designed for a reason, like, hello, just turn them on, what's the big deal? And just because some of these things are designed doesn't mean that they're designed for our biology. And I think we do have, there's a great book, Comfort Crisis, where we have a bit of this comfort crisis because I'm sorry to keep bringing all these American centric stats, but I think they can also apply and extend outside of America. That we know that since 2001, the EPA did a study and found that the average American was spending around 93% of their time indoors, and included automobiles. And so that was it before a pandemic, smartphones, Netflix, all the fun things. So it's probably way more at this point, and I think it's a good assumption that it extends across countries. So if that's the case, then we've made it so comfortable for ourselves. So we have this, temperature controlled existence. We have the ability to flip on and flip off lights and our, heart's content, not realizing that this comfort is actually really wreaking havoc with our biology. And I think we'll start to see more and more of this as the years go on, because we're seeing more and more research in the circadian realm, this chronobiology, the science of time and how time affects our biology. So I anticipate that this will become more prevalent of our understanding of, oh, geez, we set this up to give us that comfort, not realizing that actually it's kind of, there's no free lunch, if you will.
Yeah. The cost of comfort, I think, in a lot of realms, like we see it in body composition, we see it in health, just health science in general, the impact that comfortability has made, that the industrialization of the West has made, that this current social societal standards that we have has made a huge impact on the overall lifestyle and living standards of a person. And we think it's usually for a positive thing. We think it's usually for it's going to be a net positive and it's going to have a great outcome and a good return. But in that comfort, there isn't struggle. And struggle is where we grow. Struggle is where we adapt, we fight to survive, we get better, or just utilize the biological skills that we have. And actually, the adage of like, if you don't use it, you kind of lose it. Well, if you don't use these things properly, we kind of start to offset and lose them. Just muscle mass in general, brain function in general, the consequences of not sleeping, where it starts to impact those things in general. Like, it gets the comfort will then eventually cost you in the long run, because you stop being comfortable, you become sick, or you become weak, or you become broken. So it's like exactly like the book goes on to say, it is a crisis of comfort. It's the current social living style is not conducive to the human that we were only a few hundred years ago.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And then we're finding that modern day effects of that, these type of diseases that we hadn't
Yeah.
seen previously. And granted, there's great advances in medicine and there's all kinds of things for not dealing with whatever, polio or certain things
Yeah.
in the same ways. And
We're
yet
creating new ones though.
we create new ones,
Yeah.
plenty of new ones
Yeah.
and chronic,
Yeah.
really a whole new slew of issues. So as it relates to sleep, I think the big takeaway for people, I hope, out of all this is one, I hope we're sparking enough intrigue and interest into your great wise point around the why and the how. So one, just having that motivation to learn more about this skill set is crucial. And I think absolutely, I know you mentioned your like amazing in-depth sleep quiz. So like doing some of these things to start to get aware of how are we performing in this area. And then beyond that, then we can start to understand, well, what might it take to get great sleep? But so out of this, what I would hope that people could begin with is just even starting with that first call out of the consistent wake up time married to bright light exposure. If you're already doing some version of that, although I will say most people I see all the time a blind spot where people are like, I'm pretty consistent. And then I look at their stats on their, different wearables, and then they might be consistent for some of the week. And then the weekends come
Yeah.
and
The
then
weekend
they
comes.
sleep
Yeah.
in and it's all
Yeah.
over the place. So,
Yeah.
and not even realizing it for themselves. Many people are genuinely surprised
Sunday
when they look at
sleeping.
their stats. Yeah, they're like, oh my God, I didn't realize it was that long or whatever. So, even just starting there and having that last an extended period of time married with that bright light exposure, and then starting to get creative on the amount of ways that you can get more bright light exposure than the average person. Because just know that the indoor lighting for most indoor spaces is around sub 1000 lux. That is wildly insufficient as compared to what we would have been exposed to outside. So on a summer day, near the equator, you could get to around 100,000 lux. And so it can get very, very bright, and yet you can't even remotely hit that indoors. You just can't do it. So it really requires physically going outside. So one of the other practical takeaways I would say is also like so boring and yet I think so life-changing is walking. Just physically getting ourselves outside. I find like my, dog owners or whatever we can set them up great because the more we can get that out, such a stack where we're getting a lot of physical benefits, lowering of anxiety, but for the circadian component, get to expose to this bright light, particularly on that first half, if you can get for the sunrise component. And then even if you're able to be present for sunset, that helps prepare the body to kind of wind down. Those things can be great places to start.
It's wild, isn't it? Like, I guess a kind of like a little wrap up point before we get to a few questions is it doesn't matter whether you're a high performer, it doesn't matter whether you're a general person who just wants to go to their job, live and breathe, and they work for the weekend and they just want to hang out with the family. Across fields of health and science, the basics always tend to show up. Get outdoors, be active, get 7 to 9 hours of sleep, drink water, eat good whole foods, don't have a lot of alcohol and caffeine before you go to bed or just generally across your day. These same consistent trends in every field of people that I speak to, even the fields that I coach and I work in that I've studied, they all tend to show up for this, not the same benefits, but they always show up as like the basics. And those basics always produce results. Get outside and get some sun. Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy idea.
I know. Crazy idea. It's like there was a bestseller, Eat, Move, Sleep, a while back, and it's just that's the title. And yet half the time it's those foundational components can be they work together and in tandem and have bi-directional relationships. So yeah, you're pointing to something really great. And yet those things take real behavior change, which I know you're passionate around, and that identity shift. So even if we just begin with the small, to the point of behavior change, one of people often credit BJ Fogg out of Stanford as being kind of like the father of behavioral change. And he points to just these really tiny habits. He's a guy that says, like, if you want to floss your teeth, like floss one tooth and celebrate it. So, even if we just start with this piece of, your mornings are the same wake up time, and then you go for a walk, because then you'll get your light too. How can we do that and then celebrate that? Start there.
You'll really appreciate. So one of the things that I do, the way I celebrate like clients when they start improving sleep, I was going to show it. One of my clients' progress the other day. I was going to take a photo and send it to you.
No way.
One of the things I do is I put it into a context, right? So a lot of people, when they come to me, is like 5 to 6 hour sleep windows, right? Like that'll be like there.
Yeah, totally.
It's way too baffling to me how that's an average almost that I've established, is that 5 to 6 hours is like where people generally come to me at. And eventually, like I work them up, we'll drill in, like, instead of going straight from 5 or 6 to 8 or 9, let's teeter this up a bit. Let's taper this up and just try and get consistent with 7, 8, 8, 9, whatever it is. And one of the things I drill home, like one of the first points of contact when I see that 7 as my average, is if we work that out across like a week, right? 6 hours over 7 days. If you've given me 7 hours over 7 days, you've essentially just given yourself an extra night's sleep. That evaluation of what you've just done, if you look at those numbers, you've added an hour to every single day, 7 days a week. Now you have 7 hours. You just added a whole extra night's sleep by just adding an hour to each day. And the look on their face when they see that, they're just like, oh, fuck, you're right. And it's like, that simple thing that we've been trying to fight to get, you just added an extra. And then on top of that, you just, as positive reinforcement goes, just add something along the lines of, the improvement in lifespan, you just gave yourself an extra 10 years back to your life. Now we maintain this for the rest of time. You've just added 10 years to your life by doing this. And it's just like those little micro positive reflections, habit stacking, those basic behavioral change cues and skills that let's just start there. Whether you're a boss, whether you're a CEO, an executive, like I work with miners, FIFO workers, athletes, bodybuilders, whole list of people, and they all benefit from the same thing. And they're just more bloody sleep.
Oh, love it. Oh, what a way to put a bow on it. I think that's so well said and so important. So thank you for the work you're doing. That is so needed.
All right, let's wrap this up because you have got a big day, I'm sure. And
we got to get you sleep. I so appreciate you taking one for the team. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So couple questions. One tip. If I'm do you guys have FIFO work over there? Do you guys call it FIFO work, like fly in, fly out shift work?
Yes, we do. We do, which is really problematic. So,
a lot of my guys, I work with a lot of miners. We do a wellness program that we run with some a mining company over here. If you give one big tip to my guys that do night shifts, they're out on site. They got to live in the dongas and the portable houses. They're going to sleep on site with the 24-hour construction going on. What's one thing you'd say for them as a priority to get the best sleep on site they can get?
Yeah, I would say to actually get an app called the Shift Work app, and it's out of the same creators from Time Shift. So like this Time Shifter app. So they created Time Shifter that's for travel. So if you're ever traveling, yes, so good, so good. Really beautifully designed, and then also using the same algorithm that NASA uses to keep its astronauts on time when it's shuttling through space for their astronauts. Every 90 minutes, the sun is rising and setting when you're shuttling through space. So it's very confusing for them. So they take it super seriously. So using that same algorithm that's for time travel, or well, not literal time travel, but hopping. If you're doing long haul travel, you just put in your flight itinerary. Now they've been doing that for quite some time. They've recently come out with an app called Shift Work, and that's their version to apply. So you can put in your shifts, and then it can help really even in prep for your shifts. So in days in advance, how you can begin to time shift as a verb. So you're beginning to time shift so that you can shift over to whatever time you're setting up. That's particularly important for rotating shifts, which are just, really challenging for people. So that can be really helpful. And then aside from that, if you have a static, consistent shift, then what we're looking to do is create a lifestyle around that. Because one problem that a lot of people have is that they'll do certain shifts, for a few days, and then they'll try to go almost closer to what normal people, the normal world is doing for their sleep wake. And they'll try to be a part of, all the other social things, understandably so. but then that can really mess with them because now they're having to deal with social jet lag. So that self-created jet lag, and particularly when you're up against certain things, to have that consistency with doing something at night that is against our biology. So you really want to be mindful of this. And last, I didn't mean to give you all these extra things, but for shift working, it's really problematic. The Sleep Fix book is it's one of the few books I know of that is just pointing to shift workers. And that was by a journalist. It just recently came out. She's a ABC correspondent, shift worker herself, and had, dealt with all the sleep issues. So then she attacked it like a journalist, and found ways to support, shift workers in particular.
That's actually a really fantastic idea.
Right?
That was actually going to be one of my other questions, was what's one book that you would recommend everyone go and read, but we just dropped one there. Okay. Last thing is, no, that's pretty much covered it. That was, you pretty much just you threw out you threw out like 3 answers to the question there. So I was like, this one will last, these one will last for a book as well. No, we've covered them.
Look at us, so efficient.
that is all from me. We have had an absolute roller coaster of conversation around sleep. As we both know, it is huge. For anything more that people want to find out about you, about what you guys do, what they can do to work with sleep as a skill, how do they find you? What's all the details that we can point them towards?
Yeah, thank you so much. So at sleepisaskill.com, you can do a few things. So you can take a sleep assessment. And so we'll look at some of the ways that you're currently sleeping now and get you some auto-triggered, tailored information back. That can also, there at sleepisaskill.com, we can get you a free downloadable PDF, 18 strategic high-tech, low-tech things for an optimized bedroom space. And we can also get you signed up for our podcast. So we have weekly podcasts with different sleep experts and lots of free information there. And then we have a weekly newsletter that's been running for over 5 years, every single Monday, called Sleep Obsessions. Longtime readers on there. Would love to have people be a part of that. So just more free things that you can do to improve your sleep each week. And then lastly, if people are really struggling, I mentioned we require everyone to wear an Oura ring to participate in our programs. So we do a few things. So we have wearable audits, and that does extend to Whoop bands as well. So we do these audits so that we can just kind of hop in, take a look at your data, give you some, tailored things that you can do right away. We have cohort groups. We have one starting up in January. So then you can go through our circadian rhythm entrainment program. So come in with certain sleep stats, end with totally different sleep stats by the end of that. And then if you're really struggling, you want more hands-on support, we have one-on-one options as well.
That is fantastic. You know what? One thing that I will say just before we finish off is that all the awesome coaches and educators and guests that I have on, if it's a service-based person, people that are succeeding give so much away for free. That is one thing that, the value in giving that people don't understand when running a business. One of the first things I teach clients that I work with that are coaches is learn to give away your information for free. No one that I know that's succeeding doesn't have free information available. It's awesome to see more people doing that and having that as a baseline of their system. So definitely a hats off to you guys. What you're doing is definitely necessary and hopefully starts to reach more people. I thoroughly appreciate you finally jumping on and us managed to get a time together and get into to chat and ramble sleep.
I love it. Well, I so acknowledge you for being a stand for sleep. And, I think you're a pioneer in this area of really making a strong case for the importance of this. So I so acknowledge you and just thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share on your platform.
I appreciate you coming on so very much. That is it from us, guys. Appreciate you listening, and make sure that you are liking, subscribing, and go follow Mollie for more information.